There's a moment in the summer of 2007 when two men who ran the most successful phone company on earth watched a rival's product demo, and both of them were right about what they saw. One of them was in awe of it, the other one dismissed it. Neither of them was wrong. This is a story about a company that didn't fail to see its biggest threat coming. It saw it clearly, studied it carefully, and made a series of defensible, rational decisions about it, using a version of the world that had already stopped being true. Research in Motion, the company that made the BlackBerry, was founded in 1984 in Waterloo, Ontario, by an engineering student named Mike Lazaridis, working with a fellow student, Douglas Friggin. For its first decade, RIM was a small wireless technology consultancy, the kind of company that builds parts for other people's products. The device that would define it hadn't been invented yet. That changed when a businessman named Jim Balsillie joined, taking a role as co-CEO and co-chairman, sharing both the top executive job and the board's leadership with Lazaridis, rather than splitting them the way most companies do. Lazaridis ran engineering. Balsillie ran the business side, sales, finance, the relationships with the carriers and enterprises who would actually buy the thing Lazaridis' team was building. That structure mattered more than anyone realized at the time. We'll come back to it. What the two of them built together was something genuinely new. A phone that handled email like a real computer, with a keyboard built for actually typing at speed, aimed squarely at exactly the people who set corporate technology budgets: bankers, lawyers, government officials, eventually the President of the United States. It wasn't trying to be everything to everyone. It was trying to be the one indispensable tool for a specific, high-value kind of user. And it succeeded at that so completely that BlackBerry became the generic word for a category it had invented. By June of 2008, BlackBerry stock hit an all-time high of $147.55 a share. The company controlled over half the U.S. smartphone market. IDC put it at 55.3% in early 2009, and close to a fifth of the market worldwide, according to Gartner. Tens of millions of people carried one. Entire industries organized their communication around it. This was not a company that got lucky, and it wasn't coasting on an early lead either. This dominance was still building, years after some analysts expected a challenger to have already arrived. This was a company at the absolute height of its own competence, executing a strategy that had already been tested against real competitors for the better part of a decade, and winning. 6 years earlier, BlackBerry had already looked death in the eye once. A patent dispute with a company called NTP escalated all the way to a real, live threat, a U.S. court order that could have shut down the entire BlackBerry network, nationwide, overnight. In March of 2006, RIM settled for $612.5 million to make the threat go away. They survived it, and surviving it, quietly, taught the company something it didn't know it was learning. We faced down worse than this before. 10 months later, Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced a phone with no keyboard at all. Mike Lazaridis was reportedly watching from a treadmill. His response, by multiple accounts, was, "How did they do that?" Genuine technical respect from an engineer who understood exactly how hard what he was looking at actually was. Fitting that much computing power, that smooth an interface, into a device that thin was a real engineering achievement. And Lazaridis, of all people, was positioned to know it. Jim Balsillie's public response was different. "It's okay. We'll be fine. One more entrant into an already very busy space." Both of them were describing the same 10 minutes of footage. Both of them were telling the truth about what they saw. Internally, The case for dismissal wasn't unreasonable either. The iPhone's on-screen keyboard was worse for typing than a physical one. Its battery life was worse. Its first version couldn't even run third-party apps yet. And the people BlackBerry actually sold to, IT departments buying thousands of secure devices at once, for employees who needed reliable email more than they needed a web browser, had no obvious reason to want a phone, built for watching videos over one built for encrypted, manageable communication. Every one of those observations was correct. That's what makes this interesting. This isn't a story about a company that got the facts wrong. Here's the actual machine that had been running underneath BlackBerry's entire success. An IT department evaluates a device for security and manageability. It chooses BlackBerry because BlackBerry is built exactly for that evaluation. Encrypted messaging, remote wipe, centralized device management, a keyboard optimized for the fast, high-volume typing that business communication actually requires. That choice renews an enterprise contract. The contract funds more engineering, aimed at exactly the same buyer, with exactly the same priorities, refined a little further each year. And the loop closes and runs again for over a decade, getting measurably better at its one job every single cycle. This machine wasn't broken. It was the best version of itself that had ever existed at the exact moment the iPhone launched. Every gear in it was doing precisely what it was built to do, and doing it better than any competitor could. The only thing nobody built into the machine, because nobody had ever needed to before, was a way to notice if the input at the top, who actually chooses the phone, ever quietly changed underneath it. The machine had no sensor for that question. It had never had to have one. Remember that unusual structure from the beginning. Two co-CEOs, sharing the chairman's role as well, instead of splitting the top executive job from the board's oversight of it. By 2011, shareholders and analysts were openly calling it a problem, arguing that RIM's board lacked the independent oversight to force a hard call when one was needed. Here's what that structure actually cost the company. Concretely, it meant Lazaridis' honest technical alarm and Balsillie's honest commercial dismissal never had to be reconciled into one decision. Two true reactions to the same event, both left standing, side by side, because the org chart never forced a choice between them. In a company with a single decisive executive, someone eventually has to ask which red of the iPhone the company is actually going to act on. At RIM, nobody structurally had to. In January of 2012, both men stepped down as co-CEOs. Thorsten Heinz, RIM's chief operating officer, became CEO. Lazaridis moved to vice chair, and Balsillie left the board entirely within the year. By then, the assumption at the center of the company had already been running unexamined for 5 years. In April of 2011, RIM finally answered with a product of its own, a tablet called the PlayBook. It shipped without its own email program, without its own calendar, without its own contacts app. To use any of those, you needed to already own a BlackBerry phone and tether the two together over Bluetooth. At launch, it had around 3,000 apps available, against roughly 300,000 for its competitors. This wasn't RIM doing nothing. This was RIM building a real product on a real deadline, staffed by real engineers working hard, using the only set of assumptions it had ever needed before. A BlackBerry product serves BlackBerry customers through BlackBerry infrastructure, sold to the IT department that already trusts us. Nobody inside the company had to be careless or lazy to end up here. They just had to keep being consistent with everything that had worked for the last 10 years. The market reaction was immediate and unflattering. The PlayBook was discontinued in 2013 after roughly 2.5 million units sold against far larger ambitions and a significant inventory write-down along the way. The same machine that built an empire had just built the wrong product for the world it was actually launching into. The numbers, plainly. Gartner recorded BlackBerry's share of the global smartphone market at roughly 20% in 2009. By the first quarter of 2011, that had fallen to 13%. By the first quarter of 2012, 6.9%. In the US specifically, the market BlackBerry had once controlled outright. The decline followed the same shape, just as steeply. BlackBerry's own next-generation operating system, BB10, didn't ship until January of 2013, a little over 6 years after the iPhone, and after the market had already decided, without BlackBerry's input, what a smartphone was for. By the time BB10 arrived, it wasn't competing for new territory. It was trying to win back ground that had already been permanently redefined. Look at the machine again. Nothing inside it ever malfunctioned. The input changed. Employees, not IT departments, started choosing their own phones and simply bringing them to work. A shift now remembered by the shorthand, bring your own device. And the machine, still running exactly as designed, kept optimizing for a buyer who was quietly disappearing from the decision entirely. It kept asking, does this satisfy the IT department? And kept getting an honest yes, right up until the IT department had stopped being the one who decided. That's the actual answer to how the company that invented the smartphone lost it. Not a company that ignored a threat. Not a company that loved its keyboard past the point of reason. A company that kept correctly solving a question the market had already stopped asking. It's tempting to make this a story about a keyboard, or about executives who missed something obvious sitting right in front of them. It's a more useful story than that, and a less comfortable one. BlackBerry didn't get the iPhone wrong. It got the buyer wrong. Or rather, it kept getting the buyer right, for a version of the world that had already moved on without telling anyone. Every decision along the way was reasonable, individually, given what had always been true before it wasn't anymore. The hardest kind of mistake to catch isn't the one where you stop paying attention. It's the one where you keep asking exactly the right question, a few years after it stopped being the right question to ask.